Hello again, everyone. I'm Dr. George Simon, and welcome to another edition of the new Character Matters. This is the program where we talk about what I consider to be the defining issue of our time, the character crisis that we've been in for some time now, and what it will take to turn things around so that we can restore a sense of stability to our lives, a better sense of community, so that our relationships improve, our politics improve, so that every aspect of our lives are characterized by more integrity. On today's program, we're going to continue a discussion that we began last week on what it takes for meaningful change to take place in a person's life. So many folks these days, unfortunately, are either struggling with character issues themselves, or are in relations with individuals who have a lot of character growing to do, but don't seem to be of a mind to do that growing. Instead, they're pretty set in their ways because as they perceive it, it still works for them. And despite all manner of negative consequence, they persist in behaviors that only hurt, wound, and create dysfunction in the relationship. And it's for those reasons that I have spent so many years studying the phenomenon of character dysfunction and writing about it and doing workshops, training professionals, and giving public seminars about the topic. My first book, In Sheep's Clothing, Understanding and Dealing with Manipulative People, was a response to all the individuals that I was counseling who were in relationships with covertly aggressive people, a certain brand of narcissist who on the surface looked almost healthy, normal, sometimes had incredible charm, sometimes had a good deal of likability to them. But they always had to have their way, and they always made you feel like a fool if you dared to question them. They induced in you what many now call the gaslighting effect, where you feel crazy for questioning their character, which your gut suspects is not as wholesome as they want it to appear. And then my second book attempted to address the broad spectrum of character disturbance, which is why it's titled Character Disturbance, the Phenomenon of Our Age. What I realized, and what many researchers have come to appreciate, is character dysfunction exists along a spectrum. We have all these fancy names and pigeonholes these days for various types of narcissists and other disturbed characters. But the fact is that we are a largely broken population. This is a worldwide phenomenon. And the nature of our brokenness and the extent of our brokenness varies. And so I wrote Character Disturbance for that reason, to introduce folks to the wide variety of character dysfunction, and especially what's behind it. Because there have been so many erroneous notions that seem on the surface to explain things, but actually disadvantage people when they're trying to understand and deal with their character impaired relationship partner. I remember vividly many workshops where I repeated over and over again the old axiom to the professional counselors, psychiatrists, psychologists, social workers, marriage and family therapists, et cetera, attending the conference. I repeated to them the old mantra that only hurt people hurt people. This has been a commonly accepted explanation for why people do terrible things. Thinking was nobody would behave in such a broken, dysfunctional way if they themselves hadn't been broken first and by a lot of adverse circumstance. Perhaps they abuse because they were abused. Perhaps they neglect because they were neglected. Perhaps they don't know how to bond because they were unbonded. And it goes on and on and on and on. But it's not just hurt people that hurt people. You know what? Indulged people hurt people too. Pampered people hurt people. People who have come to expect. People who have always felt special, no matter what they do. They hurt people too. You don't have to carry around deep buried wounds to behave in a poor way within your relationship. Things are a lot more complicated. And I've dedicated my life and my work to helping lay things out there in a way that the average person can understand. Because we are all dealing with this phenomenon, and there are many reasons for it. After I'd written my first two books, I was approached to write a book, kind of taking off on the title about, there was a popular book about why bad things happen to good people. And the publishing house that was soliciting my input wanted to fashion a book about why basically good people do awful things. And that morphed into an exploration of why people do awful things, period. A wide variety of explanations for why not just good people do awful things, but why certain entitled, not so good in character people do bad things. Basically trying to explore in more depth and with more honesty the reasons we have so much dysfunction in our relationships. And as an aside, this book was the first to address what I believe are the possible ways that genuine faith in something bigger can be an excellent vehicle for what some have mysticized into calling personal salvation. And then lastly, for years, I have been working on a book to expand upon some basic principles, time-honored principles, that a lifetime of working with disturbed characters and their relationship partners has taught me are absolutely essential, not only to learn and to put into practice, but to take deeply to heart. I called them the 10 Commandments of Character. And they are the centerpiece of my latest book, Essentials for the Journey. And in this podcast and in the coming weeks, I'm going to be talking about the transformation that needs to take place in a person's heart for things to really change, especially when someone has a good deal of character disturbance to address. Today, I'm going to introduce what I consider to be the most essential key to understanding why the most problematic characters among us have problems learning the lessons that we need them to learn or that we wish that they would learn. Why dysfunctional behavior persists despite all manner of negative consequence. So today we begin that discussion, and we'll be continuing it over the next few episodes. One of the things that I learned very early on in my clinical case study research and in my professional experience is that we do ourselves a severe disadvantage when we approach any problem with any preconceptions. And we also disadvantage ourselves when we paint with a broad brush, when we make generalizations. I remember the first time that I encountered an axiom in my professional training, in my student years, when I heard the mantra, behavior is controlled by its consequences. It's just that simple. A general rule, a general principle, it always applies. So if a behavior is occurring, it's because it's been reinforced or because it hasn't been met with a sufficiently negative consequence. And you can control it, completely control it, if you just set the right contingencies. And there are all kinds of studies with animals to prove this. And so the quest only became to find all the minute little variables that might influence the way that you reinforce or fail to reinforce certain behaviors, to make sure that the behaviors you wanted to increase would increase and the behaviors that you wanted to diminish would diminish. What an ultra simplistic and frankly erroneous notion, and a pompous one at that. To think we have that much control, especially over matters of the human heart. So that was one thing that kind of sat with me for a while. Another thing was coming to appreciate that most of the folks that I had been dealing with significant character disturbance, who had had some kind of intervention either imposed upon them or they half-heartedly participated in it to mediate some kind of crisis within their relationship. All of these folks had been told the same things over and over and over again. They could recite them to you left and right. Yeah, I know. I should do this. I should do that. I should see it this way. I should see it that way. Yeah. But problematic behavior persisted. And it showed up in the here and now, in my very interactions with them in the therapeutic encounter in my office. That's when I began to appreciate that real change, genuine change, only occurs within the human heart. And there's a particular obstacle for some folks that prevents that. And it's a matter of the heart. For some folks, once they've understood a principle, because it's been exemplified to them over and over again, once they understand a particular life lesson that people want them to learn, or a set of operating principles that people want them to adopt, once they understand at an intellectual level what's being asked of them, they have to be of both a mind and a heart to want to do it, to really want to do it. And a couple of things get in the way for some characters. I refer to this dilemma most often as a higher power issue. A lot of folks misinterpret that. This is this whole idea of something bigger at stake than just our own self-interest. And you have to care about that to really want to change and grow. But some people have issues with that, especially the folks among us who, for various reasons, not just because of the circumstances in which they were raised, not just because of that, but also because of some innate predispositions that they themselves possess. Some folks come to the table feeling like they simply don't have to, that they are above the need to be subordinate to some higher operating principle, to anything higher, anything bigger. Yes, some folks come out of situations where their experience with the authority figures in their life has been so negative, but they can't develop the heart to respect anything bigger or more powerful. But that's not always the reason folks can't find it within their heart to put themselves at the service of something bigger. Some folks have an innate internal revulsion to the whole enterprise. And it doesn't come out of fear. It's not born of past trauma. It's just that they innately detest the whole idea of being subservient or subordinate. They're hardwired to be dominant. There are these creatures in the rest of the animal kingdom too. And they're necessary for the survival of the pack. And they were necessary for us in the earliest days of our survival too. But we now live in a much more advanced civilized age. And so those folks who are predisposed that way don't fit very well. So finding room in the heart for these folks to even recognize something bigger, let alone put themselves at the service of that something bigger, is a very difficult, challenging enterprise. Still, because that's precisely what needs to be done. In my work, I focused on it like a laser beam. And I realized something very powerful, that when you actually attend to the source of a problem, you can make some headway. But when you attend to all kinds of things that you think and sincerely believe are the source of the problem, you're going to get nowhere. And you deserve the nowhere you're getting. My work became so much easier. A lot of folks ask me at workshops all the time, how do you do this work? How do you work with the broken among us? Not just the wounded, broken, the truly wounded, worried folks who are hurting and are begging for help and support. Not those folks, but the folks that seem unmendable, the hardened. How do you work with them? I would be asked. And I would answer, as soon as you discard all those crazy, mixed up notions about why they do what they do, it gets really very easy and pleasant, because as hard as it is to really foster change, occasionally you witness some growth, and that's worth everything. Anything that any of us can do to set the stage for character growth makes everyone's life better. That's really why I wrote Essentials for the Journey. Until the end, I will keep doing my part in helping to set a stage. Can't make things happen, but you can lay some groundwork. You can plant seeds. You can do the watering. You can provide the essentials. And that makes all the difference, because it isn't just about facilitating growth in the character impaired. It's about growing yourself. The principles I outline in this book, although they're meant certainly to help folks who are character impaired become better people, are meant to help anyone grow in a positive sense of self and in a capacity to love and make of themselves a positive contributor to this whole enterprise we call human life. Now, of course, I can't be vain enough to know that this sense that I have is necessarily valid, but I truly do sense intuitively that we are at the dawn of a very different age. You know, we've been through many different ages before with many different characteristics and very different demands. We had to cope in certain ways at certain times in order to make it here. But this universe of ours is not a static one. It's dynamic. Worlds come into existence and they pass out of existence. Stars are born and they explode. Nothing is permanent. And so it is with our overall social milieu. Some things are worth preserving. Other things have to change, or else we don't survive. And for a while, we've been in a cultural mindset characterized by far too much entitlement, expectation, grandiosity, hedonism, egocentrism, and it appeared to work for us, even though on many levels, clearly it wasn't working. The times and circumstances are changing and forcing us, in a way, to come to terms with the ways we've been thinking about things and doing things. It's not just that we have to change. It's that we must develop the proper heart to embrace the changes that we need to make. Our communities will be restored. Our relationships will become more wholesome. Our marriages will hold together. Our families will be more intact. Once we find room in our hearts for embracing certain principles that can truly save us, but we have to reckon with those principles. And in all of the Character Matters podcasts that I'm going to be doing this year, I'm going to be referencing those principles, and I'm going to be talking about the reasons why we have for so long had a problem embracing them. Explanations that come out of my experience and my desperate attempt to make all of the training and theories and supposed laws of behavior that I was taught, that were drilled into me for so long, trying to make sense of those things, especially in view of what my folks were teaching me. This is perhaps the greatest lesson of all. You know, we, in psychology, in our, and in other fields, too, other allied fields, we really entertain our egos with these tests, these personality tests that purport to tell you who you are. So we pose questions to you within a certain framework, and we make you answer those questions only within a specific, narrowly defined way. And so therefore you report on yourself. And then what we do is we take what you reported within these narrowly defined structures, and we report back to you what you said, but we say it in a different way, kind of like we've somehow magically deduced who you are. And you say to yourself, oh my goodness, yeah, that's me. Well, frankly, that's what you told us. And within a narrowly defined set of parameters. But if we really want to know who a person is, we will make it perfectly safe for them to reveal themselves, every part, the good, the bad, and the ugly. You're the best informant about you. You always have been. And to pigeonhole you based on narrowly defined parameters for you to describe yourself is really, I think, the height of arrogance. Yet we do it all the time. It's just in our nature, sometimes to be pompous. What I learned and what I try to convey in all of my books is what my clients have taught me about themselves, and not just the relatively decent characters struggling with internal hangups and low self-esteem and emotional wounds and whatnot, but also those people who had a problem behaving in a responsible, ethical way, who have, for one reason or another, lacked the desire to be the kind of person that we would hope that they would be. And they taught me that these kinds of problems don't just develop out of wounding. I've mentioned in workshops many times the dysfunctional scene that occurs in so many families where parents, for one reason or another, are either too absent or too impaired themselves to properly parent their children. And it's natural for a naturally gifted, talented, insightful child within a dysfunctional family system and who rises to the top, so to speak, and is the one that takes all the responsibility, does all the mothering, does all the fathering, or whatever the case may be, because the other folks aren't doing it. It is so natural for that person to come to believe that they've got this, that there's no higher power they really need to respect, because they haven't had a higher power to respect and they haven't counted the benefits of that. There are many reasons that people can end up where they are with regard to the embrace of the commandments that I'll be talking about. Many, many, many different reasons. But you know what? It doesn't make a difference. And that's where, in my opinion, most therapists make tragic mistakes, because all that matters is right now. Where's your head at right now? Where's your mind at right now? What kinds of actions do you take right now? How are you predisposed to respond to me right now? That's where the agency of change lies, in the power of the moment, in the power of real love, which is also not what we've made it out to be. So I have a lot more to talk about it in the coming editions of Character Matters, and I invite you to tune in. I invite you to make comments. I invite you also to visit my blog at www.drgeorgesimon.com. That's DRGEORGESIMON.com. Avail yourself of the hundreds of articles there and the variety of information that's there. And of course, my books, In Sheep's Clothing, Understanding and Dealing with Manipulative People, Character Disturbance, The Phenomenon of Our Age, The Judas Syndrome, How Did We End Up Here, and my latest work, Essentials for the Journey, all available on Amazon, and some in multiple formats. People have been asking me about the audio version of Essentials for the Journey. Hang in there. It will be forthcoming. I'll have an announcement about that, I hope sometime in the middle of the year. So until next time, on the next edition of the new Character Matters, I'm Dr. George Simon, thanking you for tuning in. See you next time, and take care.